Eleanor Hartwell stood in the long-term parking lot of Denver International Airport, her suitcase wheels grinding against the asphalt. The November air bit at her knuckles, but her boarding pass to Seattle was tucked safely in her coat pocket, a promise of her sister's mountain cabin and a week of quiet holiday warmth. She was 74, her steps deliberate but steady, her mind sharp despite the occasional misplaced key or forgotten grocery list. She'd checked her bag, passed security, and was moments from boarding when a jolt stopped her cold. Robert's will, the original, not the copy in her desk drawer, was still at home. She cursed softly, her breath clouding in the chill, and turned the car around. It would be a quick detour, in and out in 5 minutes. The drive back was unremarkable, the city's gray skyline blurring past. Eleanor's home, a modest 2-story with ivy creeping up the brick, waited at the end of a cul-de-sac in the quiet suburb of Lakewood. She parked crookedly, her keys jangling as she hurried to the front door. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open, its familiar groan louder in the still afternoon. She didn't call out. Something in the air felt too quiet, too heavy, like the pause before a storm. Her keys rested in her palm, but she didn't drop them into the ceramic bowl by the door as she always did. Instead, she clutched them tighter, her pulse a slow thud in her chest. Eleanor stepped into the hallway, her low-heeled shoes brushing the hardwood. Voices drifted from the study, low and deliberate, like whispers meant to be buried. She froze, her back pressing against the wall near the archway. The words were careful, calculated. And one voice she knew too well, Marcus, her only son. "If she's showing signs, we can make the case," he said, his tone clipped, professional. "She's 74, with the right filing. Diminished capacity isn't hard to prove." Another voice, smoother, replied, "I've already got a draft." Misplacing things, repeating stories, skipping her taxes last year, it's enough to start. That was Jonathan Pierce, the lawyer Marcus had brought around after Robert's death 2 years ago, under the pretense of sorting out Dad's affairs. Eleanor's heart sank, heavy and slow, like a stone dropped into deep water. They were talking about guardianship, about her. She couldn't see them, but the shape of their conversation was clear, sharp as broken glass. Marcus's voice continued, listing her supposed lapses, the time she'd left her glasses in the fridge, the way she'd asked twice about his new promotion at the engineering firm. Small moments she'd laughed off, now weaponized. Pierce murmured agreement, mentioning a doctor's evaluation, a court filing. Eleanor's breath caught, shallow and silent. She wanted to storm in, to shout Marcus's name until the walls shook, but her body stayed rooted. The floorboards might creak. They couldn't know she was here. But there was something else in Marcus's voice, a tremor, barely perceptible. "You're sure this is the only way up?" he asked, and Pierce's response was swift, certain. "Your mother's sitting on a $2 million estate. Marcus, the medical bills from Sarah's treatments have pushed you to the edge. This isn't just about your family's survival. It's about securing your children's future." Eleanor's chest tightened. Sarah Marcus's wife had been battling cancer for 8 months. The treatments, the specialists, the experimental therapies not covered by insurance. Eleanor had offered help countless times, but Marcus had always refused. His pride a wall she couldn't breach. Carefully, she backed away, her movements slow as a hunter retreating from a trap. Outside, the afternoon sun was too bright, too warm for the cold that had settled in her bones. She slid into her car and sat there, staring through the windshield, keys still in her hand. The woman who'd worked night shifts at the university library to pay for Marcus's college, who'd bandaged his scraped knees and cheered at his robotics fairs, was now a case file in her own home. her lips pressed together, not in anger, but in disbelief. The kind that hollows you out. Eleanor's mind drifted to Robert, her husband of 40 years, gone, but never far. She saw him at their old kitchen table, his glasses slipping down his nose as he annotated legal papers, his handwriting a maze of arrows and dates. He'd always trusted her, called her his anchor. "Eleanor," he'd said once, "if you ever feel lost, trust the process. Documentation doesn't lie." She hadn't understood then, but now, with Marcus's words echoing in her head, it felt like a lifeline. Her fingers brushed the lining of her coat, where a small voice recorder, a thumb-sized relic from her library days, sat unused. She'd carried it for years, a habit from recording oral histories. Her thumb hovered over the button. The red light blinked once, then faded. She tucked it deeper into the wool, a seed of resolve taking root. She wouldn't go back to the airport. Not yet. Eleanor started the car, the engine's hum steadying her. She didn't call her sister or check her missed flight. Instead, she drove, her hands firm on the wheel, her mind replaying the conversation like a looped tape. Marcus's voice, once so curious, so full of questions about bridges and circuits, had turned desperate, cornered. She thought of the boy who'd built sugar packet towers at the bakery, his eyes wide with wonder. When had financial pressure twisted him into this stranger? The streetlights flickered on as she passed the interstate turnoff, instinct guiding her through familiar roads. She wasn't ready to face the house again, not with its new weight of betrayal, the airport, the cabin, the holiday they felt like another woman's life now. Eleanor's chest tightened, not with fear but with clarity. This wasn't just about a will or a guardianship filing. It was about her voice, her dignity, her right to exist on her own terms. And she would fight for it, not with shouts or tears, but with the quiet precision she'd honed over decades. Eleanor Hartwell drove through the fading light, the city's edges softening into dusk. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, steady despite the storm in her chest. Marcus's words diminished capacity. Guardianship looped in her mind, each syllable a betrayal sharper than the last. She'd overheard her son and Jonathan Pierce plotting to strip her of her autonomy, to reduce her to a case file at 74, the airport, her sister's cabin, the holiday escape. They were distant now, like pages from a book she'd set aside. Eleanor wasn't running. She was preparing for war. The car turned onto Pearl Street, a route she hadn't taken in years. Instinct, not logic, guided her to a small bakery wedged between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop. The awning was new, burgundy and crisp, but the smell spilling through the open door was unchanged cinnamon, butter, toasted almonds. This was where Robert had brought her every Sunday, rain or shine, back when they lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, back when Marcus was a boy with scraped knees and a mind buzzing with questions about how things worked. Eleanor parked, her breath shallow, and stepped inside. The counter gleamed, modern and polished, but the tables were still mismatched, each with a tiny vase of seasonal flowers. She ordered a coffee, black, and sat by the window, her fingers curling around the cup for warmth. The sidewalk outside was alive with people in thick coats, heads down, moving fast. Eleanor's eyes drifted, unfocused, as memories rose like steam. She saw Robert at the same table, his newspaper spread out, glasses slipping as he read. Marcus, barely 8, stacked sugar packets into wobbly towers, asking how elevators worked, why bridges didn't fall. "Give me the blueprint, Mom," he'd say, unsatisfied with simple answers. She'd brought home library books, circled paragraphs in pencil, signed him up for engineering camp before he even asked. He was curious then, not desperate. When had financial pressure changed that Eleanor sipped the coffee, its bitterness grounding her? She thought of the signs she'd ignored Marcus insisting on handling Robert's estate, claiming it was too much for her, replacing their family accountant with a firm she didn't know, setting up automatic payments for her property taxes without asking. Each move had felt like care. But now they rearranged themselves into a pattern, like puzzle pieces flipped to reveal a hidden image. The picture wasn't just greed, it was desperation. Sarah's cancer treatments had drained their savings, pushed them toward bankruptcy. Marcus, proud Marcus, who'd never asked for help even as a child, was drowning, but understanding his motive didn't excuse his method. Her fingers brushed the voice recorder in her coat pocket, its weight a reminder of the choice she'd made in the airport parking lot. She wouldn't confront Marcus yet. Shouting wouldn't undo his plan. She needed evidence, a shield built document by document, word by word. Robert's voice echoed in her mind, a memory from years ago. Trust the process, Eleanor. Documentation doesn't lie. She hadn't understood then, but now it felt like a roadmap. His will, his notes, his trust in her, they were her starting point. Eleanor left the bakery, the coffee half finished, its taste lingering like regret. The sky had turned gray, the air sharp against her cheeks. She zipped her coat to her chin and stood still, the world moving around her. This wasn't just about protecting her estate. It was about reclaiming the woman she'd been before she let others define her, the archivist who organized rare collections, who could recite cataloging standards by heart, who once found a Civil War diary behind a broken filing cabinet. That Eleanor wasn't gone. She was awakening. Back in her car, she pulled out her phone and scrolled to a number she hadn't called in years. Victoria Chen, her colleague from the university library. Victoria was sharp, always one step ahead, with a knack for spotting flaws in a plan before it unraveled. They'd worked together for 15 years, cataloging manuscripts, sharing jasmine tea during late shifts. Life had folded in on itself after Robert's death, but Victoria was still out there, grounded, reliable. Eleanor dialed, her voice calm but firm as she left a message. Victoria, it's Eleanor. I need a legal mind I can trust. It's personal. Call me. The phone buzzed within the hour, Victoria's name lighting up the screen. I'll be at your place by 4 tomorrow, she texted. No questions, no hesitation. Eleanor exhaled, a weight lifting. She wasn't alone. The drive home was quiet, the streets empty under a soft navy sky. Her house loomed ahead, its windows dark, but it didn't feel like a trap anymore. It was her territory, her archive, and she would defend it. Inside, Eleanor moved with purpose. She lit a single lamp in the study, its glow casting shadows across Robert's old desk. The copy of his will sat in the drawer, but she needed the original, still in the safe upstairs. She climbed the steps, her knees protesting but her resolve unshaken. The safe's dial clicked under her fingers, and the door swung open, revealing a thick folder. Robert's handwriting covered the margins arrows, dates, abbreviations only she could decode. One sticky note, yellowed but clear, read, Eleanor, if you ever feel unsure, the answer is always in the documentation. She spread the pages on the desk, her eyes scanning the chart of assets, property, investments, bonds. Next to each, a note, Eleanor to retain, Eleanor or Marcus if qualified, legal hold until independent review. Robert had been precise, protective. He'd trusted her, not just as his wife, but as his equal. The heat in her chest wasn't anger, it was recognition, the sensation of slipping back into her own skin. Eleanor pulled a notepad from the drawer and began a list. 1. Retrieve original will. 2. Secure legal counsel. 3. Audit recent account changes. 4. Document everything. Each word was underlined with slow, steady pressure. The recorder sat beside her, its red light dormant but ready. She wouldn't let Marcus erase her. Not her voice, not her dignity, not the life she'd built with Robert. The house was silent, but it wasn't empty. It held her history, her strength, and now her strategy. Eleanor Hartwell woke to the soft gray of early winter. The house hushed, except for the faint creak of pipes. The betrayal she'd overheard 2 days ago, Marcus and Jonathan Pierce plotting to declare her mentally incompetent, still burned. But the shock had hardened into resolve. At 74, Eleanor was no stranger to precision. Her years as a university archivist had taught her to build order from chaos, to preserve truth in ink and paper. Now, she would do the same for herself. She dressed slowly, her movements deliberate, and tucked the small voice recorder into her coat pocket. Today, she would begin gathering evidence. Victoria Chen had arrived the previous evening, a force of quiet authority in her navy wool coat, over jasmine tea. She'd listened to the initial recording, her expression unreadable. "We're going to build an unbreakable case," she'd said, opening her laptop. She'd asked about Eleanor's power of attorney unchanged since Robert's death, with Marcus as the designate. "We'll revoke it," Victoria said, her fingers flying across the keys. "Then a new will, a trusted executor, and time-stamped backups." She'd shown Eleanor how to use secure cloud storage, creating a folder labeled Eleanor Legal Private. Every document, every recording would live there, safe from prying eyes. Eleanor's first task was medical documentation. She drove to Dr. Martinez's clinic, her physician of over a decade. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and coffee, the chairs worn but familiar. When her name was called, she requested a comprehensive cognitive evaluation, her voice firm. "I need it in writing," she said, meeting his gaze. He didn't question her, just nodded and led her to an exam room. The assessment was thorough memory tests, reflex checks, questions about her daily routines. Eleanor answered clearly, her mind sharp despite the sleepless nights. "Doctor." Martinez reviewed her chart, his pen scratching notes, and handed her a signed letter, cognitively sound, no signs of impairment, excellent health for her age. She folded it carefully, tucking it into her bag. It was more than a document, it was armor. Back home, Eleanor prepared for Marcus's next move. He'd been stopping by unannounced lately. His visits cloaked in concern, but laced with calculation. She moved through the kitchen with purpose, setting subtle traps the kettle left slightly ajar, a teaspoon in the sink instead of the drawer, a grocery list half written on the counter. Small messes, the kind that could be mistaken for forgetfulness. She tested the recorder, its red light blinking once before fading into the wool of her coat. The house was her stage now, and she would play her part perfectly. At 2:30, Marcus arrived, his Honda pulling into the driveway with unusual hesitation. Eleanor watched from the window as he sat in the car for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel. When he finally emerged, his face was drawn, exhausted. The confident engineer she'd raised was gone, replaced by a man carrying invisible weight. Eleanor softened slightly. This wasn't just greed. This was desperation wearing her son's face. Marcus knocked softly before using his key, a courtesy that hadn't existed before Robert's death. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, a crossword puzzle half filled in front of her. A pen without a cap. She wore a loose cardigan, her hair slightly mussed, her movements slow as she looked up. He kissed her cheek, his smile strained, and commented on the chilly house. "Forgot the heat again." "Mom?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. Eleanor nodded vaguely, letting her eyes drift. "Must have," she murmured, her fingers fumbling with the pen. But she watched him carefully. The Marcus she remembered would have immediately fixed the thermostat, would have checked the pilot light and made sure she was comfortable. This Marcus stood frozen, calculating, as if her confusion was currency he could bank. The realization cut deeper than his betrayal. Her son was willing to let her suffer, to build his case. Marcus set a grocery bag on the counter's soup, bread, a tin of crackers, and began his performance. He asked how she'd been sleeping, his eyes scanning the room, the unopened mail, the calendar with no new marks, the pills by the sink. Eleanor played along, saying she wasn't sure about sleep, then trailing off mid-sentence when he offered to warm the soup. She smiled faintly, as if grateful for the help. The recorder, hidden in her pocket, captured every word, every pause that revealed his true intent. As he moved around the kitchen, Marcus's gaze lingered on details: a flickering light bulb, a letter from the insurance company. "Haven't gotten to that yet," Eleanor said when he pointed it out, her voice frail. He offered to go through it for her, his tone too eager. She pretended not to hear, stirring her soup with a slight tremble. After lunch, he leaned against the doorframe, watching her for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice carefully modulated. "I've been researching some options: mom, places with gardens, activities, staff trained for, changing needs." The words hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor blinked, her heart thudding but her face soft. "That sounds nice," she said faintly. "To have someone else worry about things." She paused, then asked, "What day is it, Marcus?" His eyes lit with satisfaction, a predator sensing wounded prey. "Thursday," he said, his smile tight. She nodded, as if the answer had slipped her mind, but inside she burned. It was Wednesday. He was so eager to document her confusion that he couldn't be bothered to tell the truth. When he left, Eleanor locked the door and sat in the study, the recorder on the desk. She replayed the conversation, his voice crisp through the tiny speaker. Care homes, memory care, research facilities. Each phrase was a thread in the net he was weaving. But she was weaving one too. Her hands didn't shake as she labeled the file Marcus Visit 1, Initial Assessment. She uploaded it to the encrypted cloud storage Victoria had set up, her fingers moving with the ease of her archival days. That evening brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah, Marcus's wife, stood at Eleanor's door, her face gaunt from months of chemotherapy, but her eyes bright with determination. Eleanor had always liked Sarah, a kindergarten teacher with endless patience and genuine warmth. Now, standing in the porch light, she looked fragile but resolute. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About Marcus, about what he's planning." Eleanor's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. "Come in, dear. I'll make tea." In the kitchen, Sarah's hands trembled as she accepted the warm mug. "He doesn't know I'm here," she began, her voice thick with exhaustion and guilt. "The medical bills. Eleanor, we're drowning. The experimental treatments aren't covered by insurance. We've borrowed against everything: the house, Marcus's 401k, even taken loans from loan sharks when the banks wouldn't help anymore." Eleanor's heart clenched. She'd suspected financial trouble, but not this level of desperation. "Why didn't you tell me I could have helped?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "You tried. Remember last Christmas when you offered to pay for my treatments? Marcus was so angry he didn't speak to you for weeks. His pride." She shook her head. "He'd rather lose everything than admit he needs help from his mother." The pieces began falling into place. Marcus's recent promotion at the engineering firm had come with a pay cut, the company restructuring to avoid layoffs. The stress of watching his wife suffer while their finances crumbled had pushed him past his breaking point. "Jonathan Pierce approached him 6 months ago," Sarah continued, her voice barely audible. said there were legal ways to access your assets for necessary care. Marcus fought the idea at first, but when the bills hit $300,000, she broke down, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm dying, Eleanor. The cancer's spread to my liver. Marcus thinks if he can just get enough money for the experimental treatment in Houston, he can save me. He's not trying to hurt you, he's trying to save me. Eleanor reached across the table, taking Sarah's thin hand in hers. The rage she'd felt toward Marcus shifted, becoming something more complex. Sorrow, understanding, and still unshakable resolve. His motive didn't excuse his method, but it explained his desperation. What he's doing is still wrong, Eleanor said gently. But Sarah, if you need money for treatment, I want to help. Not through guardianship or legal manipulation as family. The way it should be. Sarah's eyes widened. He'll never accept it. Not directly. Then we'll be creative, Eleanor said, her mind already working. I'll find a way. Eleanor spent the following week building her case with methodical precision. Victoria had helped her revoke Marcus's power of attorney and draft a new will, with herself as the primary beneficiary and Victoria as executor. She'd collected medical records, financial statements, and character references from neighbors and former colleagues. Every document was scanned, backed up, and stored in multiple secure locations. But she also worked on a different kind of strategy. Through careful research, she discovered that the experimental cancer treatment Sarah needed was available through a clinical trial at Denver's National Jewish Health Hospital. The trial would cover all costs and provide the same level of care as the Houston facility Marcus had been desperately trying to fund. Eleanor called the hospital directly, speaking with Dr. Amanda Foster, the oncologist running the trial. After reviewing Sarah's medical records, Dr. Foster confirmed she was an ideal candidate. There was even a waiting list opening in the next month. Armed with this information, Eleanor prepared for Marcus's next visit. She'd learned from Sarah that he was planning to file the guardianship papers within the week, believing he had enough documented evidence of her mental decline. When Marcus arrived on Friday afternoon, Eleanor was ready. She'd again staged small signs of confusion, mismatched shoes, a calendar with the wrong dates circled, but this time she had Victoria hidden in the guest room, recording everything through the security system they'd installed. Marcus went through his usual routine, documenting her supposed lapses, offering help with tasks she could easily handle herself. But when he mentioned the guardianship proceeding, Eleanor dropped her act. I know what you're doing, Marcus, she said quietly, her voice suddenly clear and strong. He froze, the color draining from his face. Mom, I don't know what you mean. I've been recording our conversations. I have medical evaluations proving my competency. I've revoked your power of attorney and secured my own legal representation. She stood, no longer playing the frail, confused elderly woman. I know about Sarah's cancer. I know about your debts. And I know about Jonathan Pierce's plan. Marcus sank into a chair, his facade crumbling. Mom, we're desperate. Sarah's dying. And I can't save her. The bills are crushing us. And I thought if I could just access Dad's trust fund. You thought you could steal from me to save your wife, Eleanor said, not unkindly, but without mercy. Instead of asking for help, you decided to erase me. I knew you'd never approve the experimental treatment, Marcus said, his voice breaking. You're too practical, too cautious. You'd want second opinions and conservative approaches, and Sarah doesn't have time for that. Eleanor reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. There's a clinical trial at National Jewish Health. Dr. Amanda Foster is running it. Sarah qualifies. All expenses covered. Same protocol as Houston. I've already spoken with them. Marcus stared at the papers, his hands shaking. You. What? I spent this week not just protecting myself from you, but finding a way to help Sarah, the way a family should help openly, honestly, with love instead of manipulation. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Marcus's ragged breathing. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red with tears and shame. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I let the fear and the debt and the desperation turn me into someone I don't recognize." Eleanor studied her son's face, seeing both the man who'd betrayed her and the boy who'd built sugar packet towers. "I understand why you did it, Marcus. But understanding doesn't mean I can forgive it easily. You would have stolen my autonomy, my dignity, my right to make my own choices. That's not something you can take back." Eleanor sat at her dining room table, the autumn light filtering through the curtains in soft gold streaks. The house, once oppressively silent, hummed with purpose. 2 weeks had passed since she'd confronted Marcus about his guardianship plan, and today she would make the betrayal public. At 74, Eleanor was no longer the grieving widow or the trusting mother. She was an archivist reclaiming her story, and every document, every recording, was ammunition in her fight for dignity. The table was set with a crisp white cloth, mismatched chairs arranged for relatives, and a small speaker hidden beneath a napkin holder wired to her voice recorder. Victoria Chen and her daughter Maya were already there, their presence a quiet anchor. Eleanor moved with deliberate calm, adjusting a vase of orange marigolds Marcus had brought on his last visit before she'd revealed her knowledge of his scheme. The gesture had been calculated, like his soft smiles and gentle suggestions about her safety. She'd recorded every word, every manufactured kindness, archiving his intent to strip her autonomy. Now, with cousins, aunts, and neighbors invited to discuss Robert's legacy, she would turn his performance against him. The living room glowed with lamplight, the curtains drawn to frame the November dusk. Eleanor wore a burgundy sweater and slacks, her hair neatly pinned, her eyes sharp despite the weight in her chest. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. Guests arrived in a steady trickle, their coats piling on the rack by the door. Aunt Dorothy, her laugh booming, hugged Eleanor tightly. Cousin James brought an apple pie, his teenage daughter trailing behind with shy smiles. Neighbors from across the street, the Washingtons, chatted about the early snow. Marcus and Sarah arrived last, his smile brittle, her face drawn but determined. Eleanor greeted them warmly, her voice steady, and offered Marcus a cup of cider. He took it, his fingers trembling slightly, and Eleanor saw the weight he carried. Guilt, desperation, love twisted into something destructive. Sarah had asked to attend, despite her weakness from chemotherapy. "I need to be here," she told Eleanor privately. "I need to face what we've done." Now she sat beside Marcus, her thin hand resting on his arm, her presence both an anchor and a reminder of the stakes that had driven him to betrayal. The group settled around the table. Plates of pie and mugs of cider passed hand to hand. Eleanor stood at the head, her hands resting lightly on the back of a chair. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice clear, carrying the authority of her archival days. "Robert's been gone 2 years, but his legacy, our family's legacy, lives on. I wanted us to talk about what that means, together." Nods rippled around the table, eyes warm with nostalgia. Marcus shifted in his seat, his jaw tight, sensing something beneath her words. Eleanor glanced at Victoria, seated near the window, her laptop bag tucked discreetly under the table, ready to pull up digital backups if needed. "Before we start," Eleanor said, "there's something I need to share. It's about trust, and what happens when desperation destroys it." The room stilled, Forks pausing midair, eyes narrowing with curiosity. Marcus's hand froze on his mug, his knuckles whitening. She pressed the recorder's play button, and Marcus's voice filled the room, crisp through the hidden speaker. "If she's showing signs, we can make the case. She's 74. Diminished capacity isn't hard to prove." Gasps punctuated the silence. Dorothy's hand flying to her mouth. The recording continued. Jonathan Pierce's smooth reply detailing Eleanor's supposed lapses, misplaced glasses, repeated stories. Then Marcus again. From a later visit. "I've been researching some facilities, places with memory care. It's for her safety." The words landed like stones, heavy and cold. Eleanor watched Marcus's face, his eyes wide, then narrowing as he realized the scope of her preparation. Sarah's free hand covered her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. The room erupted in murmurs, James's voice rising. "What the hell? Marcus!" Eleanor raised a hand, silencing the chaos. "I recorded this," she said, her voice unwavering. "And more. Medical affidavits, bank statements, my revised will all proving I'm as competent as ever. Marcus, you thought you could erase me to save your wife, but there were other ways." Marcus shot to his feet, his chair scraping the floor. "You don't understand," he snapped, his voice cracking. "Sarah's dying. The treatment costs $400 and $1,000, and insurance won't cover experimental procedures. We've lost everything, the house, my retirement, borrowed from loan sharks. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was trying to save the woman I love." The room turned to him, eyes reflecting both accusation and pity. Sarah tugged at his sleeve, whispering, "Marcus, stop." But he shook her off, his composure completely shattered. "You're all looking at me like I'm a monster. But what would you do? Watch your spouse die because you're too proud to ask for help. I know it was wrong, but I was desperate." Eleanor's voice cut through his anguish like a blade. "You never asked for help, Marcus. You chose theft over honesty." She pulled out a folder, her movements calm despite the chaos around her. "There's a clinical trial at National Jewish Health. Dr. Amanda Foster confirmed Sarah qualifies. Same protocol as Houston. All expenses covered. I spent a week researching it while you spent a week forging evidence of my incompetence." The room fell silent as Marcus stared at the papers, his face cycling through disbelief, hope, and crushing shame. Sarah reached for the folder with shaking hands, scanning the medical details. "This is real," she whispered. "I could get the treatment. It's real." Eleanor confirmed. "But that's not the point. The point is that Marcus chose to solve his problem by destroying my life rather than trusting me to help him. That's not love, it's betrayal dressed up as necessity." Marcus collapsed back into his chair, his head in his hands. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice muffled. "God, Mom, I'm so sorry. I knew it was wrong, but every day Sarah got sicker, and the bills kept coming, and Pierce kept saying it was the only way to get the money fast enough." "Jonathan Pierce preyed on your desperation," Eleanor said, her tone softening slightly. "But you made the choice to listen. You made the choice to gaslight me, to make me doubt my own mind, to steal my autonomy rather than ask for my help." The family gathering dissolved into smaller conversations, relatives processing the revelation in hushed tones. Some approached Eleanor with support. Others confronted Marcus with angry questions. Through it all, Sarah sat quietly, the clinical trial information clutched in her hands like a lifeline. Victoria pulled Eleanor aside as the crowd thinned. "You handled that perfectly," she said quietly. "But what happens now? The legal proceedings are still pending." "I'm withdrawing the charges," Eleanor said, surprising her. "Marcus is destroyed enough, and Sarah needs him focused on her treatment, not legal battles. But I'm not forgetting. and I'm not pretending this didn't happen." When the last guest had left, only Eleanor, Marcus, Sarah, and Victoria remained. The house felt hollow, as if something essential had been broken beyond repair. Marcus sat slumped in his chair, emotionally drained. Sarah held his hand, her own strength surprising given her illness. "I want to help with Sarah's treatment," Eleanor said finally. "Not just the trial, but everything else, living expenses while you're in treatment. The experimental medications not covered by the trial. But there are conditions." Marcus looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "What conditions?" "First, you enter therapy, both individual counseling and financial counseling. You need to understand how you got to the point where theft seemed reasonable, and you need to develop better coping mechanisms." Marcus nodded slowly. "Okay, I know I need help. Second, complete transparency, bank statements, medical bills, everything. No more pride, no more secrets. If you need help, you ask directly." "I can do that," Marcus said, his voice barely audible. Eleanor looked at Sarah, seeing the exhaustion in her face. "And Sarah, I want you to understand that I'm helping because I love you both, not because I approve of what Marcus did. I'm choosing to rebuild our relationship, but it will take time." Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Eleanor. I knew what he was planning, and I should have stopped him earlier. I was just so scared of dying without trying everything." "You were fighting for your life," Eleanor said gently. "That's understandable. But next time, trust that family means we fight together, not against each other." 6 months later, Eleanor sat in the oncology waiting room at National Jewish Health, a book open in her lap. Sarah's treatment was progressing well. The experimental protocol was showing promising results, and her latest scans had shown significant tumor reduction. Marcus had kept his word about therapy and transparency, slowly rebuilding trust through consistent actions rather than grand gestures. The family dynamics had shifted permanently. Eleanor maintained her independence fiercely, but with new safeguards in place. Victoria had become her official power of attorney, and Eleanor had established a family foundation to help relatives facing medical crises with strict oversight and application processes to prevent future manipulation. Marcus emerged from the treatment area, supporting Sarah as she walked slowly toward the exit. The chemotherapy still weakened her, but there was color in her cheeks and hope in her eyes. "How are you feeling?" Eleanor asked, standing to help. "Tired, but hopeful," Sarah replied, squeezing Eleanor's hand. "Doctor, Foster thinks we might be able to reduce treatments to every other week soon." They walked to the parking garage together, Marcus carrying Sarah's treatment bag and Eleanor holding her daughter-in-law's arm for support. The dynamic was different now, more careful, more intentional, but also more honest than it had been in years. "Mom," Marcus said as they reached Eleanor's car, "I want you to know that I think about what I did every day, not just the guilt, but the lesson of it. I almost destroyed the most important relationships in my life because I was too proud to ask for help." Eleanor studied her son's face, seeing genuine remorse and hard-won wisdom. "The fact that you can admit that means you're healing too, Marcus. Trust takes time to rebuild, but we're getting there." As she drove home through the Denver streets, Eleanor reflected on the past months. The betrayal had cut deep, leaving scars that would never fully fade. But it had also revealed her own strength, her ability to protect herself while still choosing love over vengeance. She'd saved her autonomy without sacrificing her family entirely, though the relationships would never be quite the same. The house felt different now, too, not empty but thoughtfully solitary. Maya, Victoria's daughter, had spent several weeks helping Eleanor digitize her remaining archives, and the project had brought unexpected joy. The guest room was ready for visitors, but not desperate for them. Eleanor had reclaimed her space and her voice. That evening, she sat in Robert's old study, writing in her journal. Betrayal teaches you that trust must be earned, but it also teaches you that you're strong enough to survive without it. I chose to forgive, not because Marcus deserved it, but because I deserved peace. She looked up at the window, where the dogwood tree's new spring buds were just beginning to show. The seasons had turned, and so had she. Eleanor Hartwell had faced her son's betrayal and emerged not just intact, but stronger. Her autonomy was secure, her relationships honest, and her future entirely her own to choose. The recorder sat silent in the desk drawer, its work finished, but Eleanor's voice clear, strong, and undeniably her own would never be silenced again. 1 year after the confrontation. Eleanor stood in her garden, her hands deep in the soil as she planted bulbs for next spring's bloom. The physical work grounded her, connected her to the cycle of seasons and the promise of renewal. At 75, she moved with the confidence of someone who had faced her worst fears and emerged victorious, not unscathed, but unbroken. Sarah's cancer was in remission, the experimental treatment having exceeded all expectations. She and Marcus had renewed their vows in Eleanor's backyard, a small ceremony that felt like both an ending and a beginning. The financial stress that had driven Marcus to desperation was gone, replaced by careful budgeting and honest communication about money and health. Victoria approached across the grass, carrying 2 cups of tea. "The documentary crew wants to interview you next week," she said, settling onto the garden bench. "About elder advocacy and the legal system." Eleanor accepted the tea gratefully. Her story had attracted attention from senior rights organizations, and she'd become an unexpected voice for older adults facing financial manipulation from family members. "I'll do it," she said. "If sharing what happened can help even one person recognize the warning signs or find the courage to fight back, it's worth the exposure." The house behind them was the same structure where Marcus had plotted her legal incapacitation, but it felt entirely different now. It was truly hers, not just in ownership, but in spirit. Every room reflected her choices, her tastes, her vision of how she wanted to live. Marcus visited monthly, never unannounced, always with respect for her boundaries. The easy intimacy they'd once shared was gone, replaced by something more formal but perhaps more honest. He was a good son now, but not in the way he'd been before this goodness was conscious, earned, built on the understanding that love without respect was manipulation. Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from Maya, now finishing her graduate degree in archival science. "Finished digitizing the 1987 to 1992 collection. Want a review before I upload?" Eleanor smiled, typing back her approval. The work of preserving her professional legacy had become a bridge to the next generation, a way of ensuring that knowledge and wisdom continued to flow forward. As the sun set over the Denver suburbs, Eleanor reflected on the unexpected gift that Marcus's betrayal had given her the knowledge of her own strength. She'd always thought of herself as dependent first on Robert, then on family traditions and expectations. But when forced to stand alone, she'd discovered she was more than capable of protecting herself and shaping her own destiny. The garden around her was evidence of that independence, vegetables and flowers planted according to her preferences, not anyone else's idea of what an elderly woman should grow. Tomorrow she would meet with her financial advisor to discuss expanding the family foundation, and next week she would speak to a group of social workers about recognizing elder abuse. Eleanor Hartwell had found her voice in the most unlikely way, through silence, through careful documentation, through the patient accumulation of evidence and allies. She'd learned that true power wasn't in controlling others, but in controlling her own story, and that story, she knew now, was far from over. The stars emerged as darkness fell, and Eleanor stood to go inside. Her shadow stretched long across the garden, steady and unbroken. She'd faced betrayal and emerged not bitter, but wise. Not isolated, but appropriately selective about trust. Not diminished, but refined by fire into something stronger than she'd ever known she could be. The voice recorder that had started it all was safely stored in her archives now. A tool that had served its purpose and earned its rest. But Eleanor's own voice, clear, strong, and authentically hers, would continue to speak truth for as long as she chose to use it.